Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Malika Kapoor. I'm the Deputy Global Editor of Bloomberg Live. Whether you're joining us virtually or you're here in the room with us, we are delighted that you've chosen to spend a part of your evening with us. I'm particularly excited and pleased to welcome you to Bloomberg's European headquarters. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at some of the building just now. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that it is a beautiful space. It's also one of the world's most sustainable office buildings, and you'll have a chance to get a tour of it later on. And I have to say, as someone who works here every day, it really is a privilege to come into this building every day. Let's take a look. So what is good design? What makes a design good? We're going to try and answer that question today, of course, but good design can make the world better, smarter, more sustainable, and frankly, just cooler. What role do resiliency, sustainability, technology, training, and talent retention play in the way objects, spaces, cities, movies, even our games are designed and built? We're going to try and answer these questions this evening, but we want your help. We want you to be part of the conversations. We want to know what you think. So we encourage you to send in questions throughout the evening, and we're also going to be polling you. And this is how it's going to work. Please scan the QR code that you see here. This should open up a program on your phone. Just keep your phones on silent if you can. And by using this, you'll be able to respond to polls and to submit questions to our moderators, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So let's practice this. I have a poll for you, and you have to promise to answer this as honestly as you can. So which is London's most iconic building, according to you? Buckingham. See, it's... I thought maybe with the coronation and stuff, Buckingham Palace would come on top. Okay, St. Paul's Cathedral looks like it's a clear winner. Okay, looks like you've got the hang of it. You've learned how to use this, right? So when we poll you, please do respond to the polls and send in your questions as well to the moderators. Okay, we're going to get started in a minute. And in addition to our incredible lineup of speakers, thank you all so much for being with us. We're also very excited to have two amazing, very senior journalists from Bloomberg City Lab. And we invite you to look at this exciting vertical where we've been expanding our design coverage globally. You can find it online at bloomberg.com/citylab, or also by clicking on a QR code we'll show you in just a minute. And by clicking on this QR code, you'll be able to subscribe to the City Lab newsletter. And if you choose to opt into the newsletter, you'll receive a daily digest of City Lab's stories and Kristen Kapp's bi-weekly construction paper column on architecture and design. Kristen is here with us today, despite missing his first flight from DC, but he's here. He's going to be moderating our first session. So do sign up to our newsletter. And now, before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsor, Autodesk. And one final point, we are active on social media, so do engage with us there. The hashtag is, it's hashtag Design+Make. I hope you enjoy the evening, and I'll see you in about 90 minutes. Please welcome Michael Jones, Senior Partner, Foster & Partners, and Bloomberg City Labs, Kristen Capps.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the introduction from Malika. I'll clarify for my behalf that my flight was canceled due to the weather. Horrible downpour in DC, which I suppose is just a regular day here in London.
Oh.
Thank you for joining me, Michael.
It's a great pleasure.
It is such a pleasure to be here in this project of yours. When I was coming here, several of my colleagues from the London office or from other offices who've come through London said, "Oh, just wait. You can't, when you see this building, you're gonna lose it." And I've been to the New York office a lot. It's by Pelley and Associates. It's quite a grand place, but working here this week, it really is something different. From the logic of the atrium that really brings the building together, I feel like I'm in a magical conch shell when I come to work. Tell me about the design brief. How did this project start?
Oh, well, first of all, there was no brief as such. So it was a fascinating project because I think partly the reason I came to it because I've never done an office building before. This is the first and only office building I've ever designed.
Really?
And there was a definite approach from Bloomberg, which was to challenge accepted practice in the terms of how to design a workplace. And for that reason, rather than have someone who had established ideas about how the office should work, they wanted someone who specifically had not done an office. So that's sort of how I, in broad terms, came to the project. And there was no brief as such. The brief came out of a conversation. So the first meeting I attended was in New York with Mike Bloomberg, and we just sat for a while. And out of that meeting came an A4 sheet of paper with 10 lines on it, and that became the brief. And it was that simple. And it was a little more than headlines, and it was objectives, things that we wanted to accomplish as part of the project. And then the whole process was iterative. So it was, what I would say is probably one of the best ways to design any building is a dialogue, a really constructive, collaborative dialogue between Bloomberg, the whole organization, Mike Bloomberg specifically, very specifically, and then to take what was being said and kind of begin to shape it into a brief as well as a building. So it emerged rather than being preconceived by a set of requirements.
When you say iterative, can you give me an example of one of the sustainability goals and how it drove a design feature within the building?
Well, so of the 10 line items on the sheet of paper, the one in capitals at the bottom, the biggest and largest, was sustainable. So that was a very, very clear objective right from the get-go about how to produce a building that was as sustainable as it could be. And I think the thing that's going back to this idea of iteration, where we've ended up is much better than we ever set out to accomplish, because as time progressed, as the building began to emerge, as technology and advances in innovation moved on, we were actually able to accomplish more than we could. So probably one of the biggest innovations was the introduction of natural ventilation into a huge deep plan building. I mean, when you go around later, you'll get the sense. These are enormous floor plates. So to be able to ventilate them naturally was quite a challenge. And that was not something that was on the agenda at the beginning, but we put it out there and said, look, I think we should do this. And actually, there was a lot of soul searching from everybody. At the end of the day, okay, let's do it. And so we set about completely trying to think about how best we could accomplish that in this form of building. So I'd say natural ventilation, but it was never intended to be naturally ventilated until we got to that point where And interestingly, one of the points we made back then was it's about resilience. You know, buildings need to be really resilient for the future. And actually, the biggest test was the pandemic, when the natural ventilation, because of the huge volumes of air going through this building, actually turned out to be incredibly resilient, because you could occupy it quite quickly again, because it was a much more highly ventilated building just by virtue of that. So I think we talked about sustainability in its broadest sense, not just energy, but about well-being and about people's comfort levels. And that's proved to also bring with it resilience and the ability to for the building to shift and change and accommodate, you know, certainly one of the most significant events in recent living memory. So these things emerged, but they were not right out there at the beginning. And Mike Bloomberg, I'd say, was probably the biggest driving force. He wanted to, one of the other words on it was innovate. I want you to innovate,
right.
innovate. And he often said, you know, I'd rather you beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So just push, push, push. And I think the other big sort of obvious thing is that we have a timber floor through the whole building. And, you know, that would never be done in an office until now.
Never done.
And there was we had a whole very tedious conversation about cabling and, you know, all sorts of boring realities of life. And Mike just said, well, figure it out. So we came up with this whole new system of, again, innovate. We came up with this whole system, which now you're beginning to see more broadly used. And it was having a client who was willing to challenge all of these accepted practices and the norm that I think was incredibly. I mean, you wouldn't see this building if it weren't for that mindset from Bloomberg.
I want to talk with you about the ventilation, because that's such a signature feature of so many Foster and Partners buildings that I personally have experienced. But the other thing first I want to say about them is that I feel like Foster's projects always have me looking up. And it's certainly the case in this building with the innovative ceiling. This is not something you pick up off the shelf. Tell me about how the design and the manufacture and the iteration to come up with this ceiling feature.
Well,
it's so striking from really inside and outside the building.
It was out of necessity. I mean, I'm a big, I bore on a lot with clients about the ceiling, because at night the ceiling is the elevation of the building. So for me, it's very, very critical element to any building. But for this particular building, it was a necessity, because if you can imagine a beautiful hot summer's day and you're bringing air directly in from outside, naturally ventilating, if you had a regular chilled ceiling, it would hit the ceiling, condense, and you'd have condensation running everywhere. So we had to find a way to chill the ceiling, to chill the whole building using the ceiling, but try and mitigate the risks of condensation. So by necessity, we had to develop a whole new ceiling. And in amongst all of that, we were in the beginnings of the ability to have illuminated planes rather than linear elements in. So all sorts of things came together. And you know, to Bloomberg's testament, a lot of what we did was untried, untested, and they actually went as far as building us a laboratory. I mean, us in the broadest sense of the huge team it took to deliver this, building us a laboratory to test, prove, and really innovate on that level. So the ceiling is in fact incredibly simple. It seems obvious, but it took a long time to get there. And it's effectively a massive surface area of polished aluminium, which the cooling's coming through. The area means you don't chill it, you just cool it. So you're putting less energy in to get the same cooling out. The form of the petals deal with the acoustics that are required to deliver a timber floor. So you can see it's all very integrated. So that whole ceiling is basically facilitating a timber floor as well. And then the last component of it, which is again some of the formation of the petals, as they're known, the aluminium petals, is to deal with lighting. So each of these elements sort of was designed to accomplish a specific need and objective, but it came together in this very beautiful way. I mean, I think it's beautiful, but I think it's become quite a signature of the building. And technically, it was a real challenge. And very few clients would invest the amount of R&D and the facilitation and the specialist expertise it took to do that. But without that, there would be no natural ventilation. Without that, the building wouldn't perform as it does environmentally. I mean, it would be using a huge amount more energy. So the ceiling is probably the single most sustainable element in the building. And I want to take issue with you on one thing you said.
Okay.
You described an atrium in the middle of the building, and that's the very thing we set out not to do.
Oh.
I think if Mike Bloomberg was sitting here, he would say, actually, he wanted not a big void in the middle of the building. He wanted it to be really purposeful. And he wanted people to move around the building. And again, it's part of a well-being agenda, but do it on foot. So the building's capped at 10 stories. It could have been 22 in places, but it's capped at 10 stories. And people move around on foot. And the ramp is deliberately designed and sized so that you feel able to pause for a moment, meet with someone who you've just bumped into you. We can stand there, we can have an exchange. And so I think in that sense, it's probably, I've heard it described as the biggest meeting room in the building. It's the place where people literally encounter each other, they move around. And that very much spoke to something that Bloomberg described, which was this idea of chance exchanges, chance interactions. Those are the things that are the backbone of the success of Bloomberg, and the building basically facilitates it. And that's, I think it's a little bit form follows function in that sense, but it's not an atrium.
Not an atrium. Very clear on this point now. For those of you in the audience, I want to point again to the QR code. I see a few questions have already come in, and I will be getting to those a little bit later in the chat, but you may continue to add them. I want to talk about the British Museum and the great canopy feature of that project. I think that they might be able to bring that up behind me. Maybe they already have. But I live in Washington, D.C., and we also have an incredible Foster and Partners
Smithsonian.
At the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. And it is, this great glass canopy over a courtyard that has made it one of the great rooms in Washington. It can be, the kind of downpour that will cancel a flight, and you can sit inside and have a coffee. So tell me about the project at the British Museum and how this concept kind of came about.
Well, so just to give a bit of context so that people understand, when I said I've never done an office building before, mostly what I worked on is civic buildings, like a British Museum. And I think one of the things, there are lots of strands that run through all of these projects, but part of the British Museum was you used the word room in the middle. It was about creating a giant urban room for London. It was about sorting out and addressing various urban issues about paths between key streets in Bloomsbury, about creating a way through a urban context, about creating a centre of gravity for the museum. It sorts out all of the issues that people had previously, where effectively to move around the museum, you had to walk through all the galleries, and that was creating congestion, and it was really, making the experience in the galleries not very satisfactory. So again, a bunch of thinking, and the proposal we came up with was to remove all of the very, very low quality buildings that sit in there, clear out the space, cover it so it's a year-round space, and create what we would call a square for London. And it happened to have the old Smirk reading room in the middle of it, but that was a great asset as much as anything. And so it became a sort of a puzzle about creating urban realm on a much broader scale than just in the museum. So it's very much part of a route that takes you from the British Library up on the Euston Road, around down through Bloomsbury, right down as far as Trafalgar Square, which also we worked on at the time. We were doing the same thing about trying to take the traffic out of the north side of Trafalgar Square in front of the National Gallery. So these were it was all very joined, a bit like all the parts of this building. It was all kind of a bigger joined up thinking that brought about this creation of what we think of as a public space for London as much as it is for the museum. So it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting challenge when it's not just about focusing on one thing. It's about having a much greater sense of awareness of the bigger picture in which it sits, and being able to try and help shape that and address other issues that are at large that need thinking about.
For a project like that, where you have a lot of stakeholders involved, it is a key asset to the culture, the history of the city. How do you bring them on as clients? How do you build that trust so that you can do something very innovative and something untested?
Well, it's very much part of iterative process. It's very much part of listening and responding and trying to build consensus and trying to make sure that you're, in effect, not just presenting people with a done deal, that actually everyone feels that they are invested in what it's going to become. So there's no substitute, as I said right from the beginning, there is no substitute for a conversation, a dialogue, a collaborative process. And that's whether that's within Bloomberg as an organization, within London in terms of all of the statutory bodies that had an engagement with the British Museum. It doesn't really matter on what level it is, but this idea of having a collaborative endeavor, I think, is the key to achieving any of these things. If you any other way, I don't think it's possible. You have to bring people along with you, otherwise it becomes an impossible challenge, I would say. So dialogue, being available, being able to actually, I don't care where the best idea comes from. It can come from anywhere, as long as we have the best idea ultimately, collectively, at the end of the day. So, I really think it's, people bring an overview or analysis, a contribution to a project, and they probably sometimes don't quite estimate what it's bought, but it sets about another train of thoughts. So who cares where the great idea comes from? And if you don't ask, you don't ever get a sense of what other people are thinking and what might shape things slightly differently, I would say.
Let me ask you about another challenging project, this one involving an historical retrofit, the Royal Academy. Now, as I understand this, and people in this room will know this project much better than me, so forgive me, but I believe it is actually two buildings, the Burlington House and the Victorian Galleries.
It is.
So how did you approach the retrofit for these buildings, and what were the parameters of preservation of the kinds of things you had to keep in mind for these buildings within this building?
Well, again, it was a slightly invent your own project. So, I mean, I was a kid at the time. I have to say, I'm not that old, but I was the year out student, and that was the first project I ever was engaged with. But to the point where I did 2 years out because it was turning into a very a rich and productive experience. So it's exactly like the British Museum. It's about taking a lost space, a space where people didn't even realize there was a building waiting to happen, and turning it into something, rich, amazing, and making a very bold statement. And again, you can go around a building and people don't see what or vice versa. People see what you don't see. They see something you don't. That's where the whole conversation starts. And that was just a gap filled with lavatories between two buildings. And it was pretty miserable and grim. And probably no one thought, well, actually, we can turn this into something really special. We can put a Michelangelo at the top. We can do all these things. And it's an emerging thing. Very, very rarely, in my experience, does the thing start right, it's not something that forms on day one and then you just work with it. It really emerges over a process.
I still have to imagine that must have, caused some concerns when you showed up and said, we need to take down these walls and figure out what's behind here. What did you see that made you think that there is something to be subtracted in order to come to this project?
Well, again, you're given a puzzle, you're given a challenge.
Yeah.
We need to sort out X, Y, and Z. And rather than and I always encourage clients, rather than give me the answer, tell me what you're trying to achieve, and we'll go away and maybe collectively, individually, initially, maybe we'll come back together. But tell me what you're trying to achieve, and then we'll go away and try and think about the best way to do it. So there's nothing worse than somebody coming to you and saying, well, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what I want to do, and that's it. Okay, you're giving me the answer. Tell me what you want to achieve, because people don't always understand the art of the possible. And so I think that's a classic case. There was circulation to address. There were all these various issues, and nobody probably in the Royal Academy had any instinct to say, actually, what we should do is take out all this low-grade stuff, do a few microsurgeries through the building, and look what you get. And so, that's why I encourage everybody to keep an open mind, think about what you need and want rather than what the answer is, and let's see how we get there. And that's when the dialogue starts. I really feel like I'm banging on about dialogue a lot, but to me it's essential. There's no other way to produce good design other than as a collaborative exchange.
Are all your clients so magical? Because it sounds like you have some good luck.
I've had a lot of good luck, but again, it's a relationship. These projects last a long time, and clearly, if you don't see eye to eye, it's not going to be the most productive experience. But no, clients, some are less open-minded than others. Let's put it that way, and I think that's often the challenge, which is it goes a bit back to like, well, this is the answer rather than this is what I want to try and do, and then I think you don't get the best out of us if you don't open your mind a bit to what you perhaps had never imagined.
We'll ask you to name names once we have drinks in hand. I banged on for a minute, but I'll ask a question that we've gotten from the audience here, and it's about technology. Given that a lot of your career has been focused on these kind of cultural amenities, how has technology changed your approach to the work that you do with these projects?
In different levels, in different ways. So I would say you can be the best architect designer in the world, but if you can't communicate your ideas very well, then they're just ideas on a ship. So using technology to be able to communicate in the most appropriate way for any given audience, and that varies significantly from people who are very proficient in three-dimensional things to people who have no proficiency whatsoever. So technology is immensely important for us to be able to communicate what we're trying to talk about with clients and other people, even if it's just members of the public or public bodies or whoever it is. But at the other end of the spectrum, delivering a building like this is a formidable challenge. I mean, the team was a very big, sizable team with huge amount of different discipline, and to bring something like this together without technology. And I think the British Museum is without technology and without the ability to use the latest, greatest, we could never have done it. That roof would not have been possible without, and likewise this building. So using technology then as a design tool, and then at the other end of the spectrum, giving the client at the end of the job a digital twin or whatever you want to call it, but there are lots of different ways, giving the client something meaningful at the end of the job that they can then work with. I always liken it to, it's like me handing you the ultimate sports car and saying, can you change the spark plugs on that?
Right.
Probably not.
Probably not.
But if you have the right information, you have the right model, you have something that can lead you, you probably can. So, you give somebody a thoroughbred building, they need to be able to live with it, work with it, own it, all of the things. And that's where technology equally comes in, the ability to hand the client something meaningful at the end. And in fact, I think that's a key to lots of buildings. They're only as good as, once you hand it over, then it needs to be something that is interrogatable and be able to be used properly. Otherwise, it's like having an incredibly powerful car and driving at walking speed. It's not really the point.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael, thanks for speaking with me today. I'll leave off with a question that was posed to the audience. The most iconic building in London. Is it one of those four? St. Paul's, Buckingham Palace, the Shard, the Barbican? Or do you have a fifth to nominate?
I'm very fond of the Barbican, and it would be to
Yes.
top of my list.
Yeah.
But I doubt very many, I'd
We're
say
in that
St. Paul.
minority share at the bottom,
I
I
would
think.
say, I think there are many iconic buildings, but I'm very fond of the Barbican, let's put it that way.
Okay. Me too. All right, great. Good answer. Thank you so much for having us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Marcus Engman, Creative Director, Inca Group, Andy Masibo, Designer and Creative Producer, and Bloomberg's Ruth David.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Michael and Kristen. I feel like you set us up from talking about the royalties of design to a discussion into the drivers of democracy in design. Marcus, you've spent 3 decades at IKEA, and in that period, it's become the world's most influential design brand, arguably, with mass market appeal. Can you talk a little bit about how you made that happen?
Yeah, that's a kind of a long story, isn't it? We're turning 80 this year,
Give us the headlines version.
I think it's actually our ability to do things together within IKEA that's changed a lot. We have always worked very, very close to the two ends of product development, which is like the client or the user and the factory from the very beginning. Most of our things are made, actually, the designs are made on the factory floor. So we bring the designers to the factory floor. But before going there, we're going to home visits to see what are the needs, dreams, and aspirations of people for real. And we're not really trusting typical institutes that makes surveys for you. We want to do it firsthand. We're very old school that way, one could say. And then I think it's also our starting point is most of the time pretty different to others. So when we design at IKEA, we always start with like, what's the price point that would make this product, possible for people to buy? Because we want good ideas to reach as many as possible from the very beginning. And this is kind of an ethos that we have had from the very beginning at IKEA. We call that democratic design. So we started out with form and function, but what about the last thing? That's like affordability, to make form and function like possible to buy. Then we have added sustainability and quality to that kind of formula as well. So that's encapsulated in all of our products, and that's how we measure success in our products.
And would you say one of the biggest obstacles to the mass appeal of design is price? And is that something that you'll look at from the start of coming in with the design?
I mean, it's hard to sell something, no matter the price, if it's not good enough. So, but when we do, survey almost all typologies of products, it's actually the major thresholds for making people dare to buy also like good design. What we consider is good design is actually the pricing. So if we go for affordability, it's not like there's a vast difference between having a low price and being cheap. We want to have low prices. We want to be affordable. So make it possible for people to buy it.
And I'd like to bring you in. You found design inspiration in sources that others might completely miss, the car industry, for example. Could you talk a little bit about your process and how do you go from idea to creation stage?
I designed this chair. I don't know if everyone can see it,
Yes.
but it's a good example of.
And by the way, after the event, I checked with Andu and he said, you all are welcome to come and sit on the chair and see how comfortable it is. I tried it out yesterday and I can confirm it is comfortable.
That's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good example of the way I am most interested in working, and it's basically every design is an excuse to have a conversation with an expert. So I am fascinated by car exhaust manufacturers. They have a very specific skill in TIG welding very thin stainless steel. So I started off thinking, how can I have the conversation with this person, and how can I have a conversation where both of our common goal is to both come together and make something that doesn't exist yet. Yeah. So it's kind of like a process of managing that conversation, learning the language they speak, and coming together to make something that I hope people like.
And this was one of the winners of the Atelier 100 last year. Marcus, if you could talk a little bit about the contest, how that came about, and what it was about the chair that really appealed to the judges.
Yeah, I mean, Atelier 100 is a fabulous project, I must say, but I'm not the one to sell it. It's Andu who's been through it. It's a program. It's not like a contest. So it's a program that actually IKEA and H&M came together to do. It's like the first thing that we have done together, which is like meeting the public, honestly. And it came about from out of a need that we saw, both companies, for us growing in the future, for us making things even better. We need like the best creative talent. And we saw that actually we didn't have the diversity needed in the creative talent that we sought for, because we are serving like the many people from very different places, in very different places, in different situations. Most of the people going to design schools, universities around the world are quite well-off kids with a father, like my father happened to be like the design manager of IKEA before me. And that's kind of a common thing. And we wanted to be like closer actually to the users. So we started this program. And the choice of Andu, I think he explained his interest. I'm like super interested in production. That's my, I could go nerdy for like hours talking about production because I love it. And some of the greatest things we have done in IKEA is actually, you know, when you cross-pollinate things, when you're thinking like outside of the normal box, how do I make like the next most affordable sofa? Most of the times, the big answer of that is not at the sofa supplier. It's to find like a new way of making a sofa, which is not at the sofa supplier, because the sofa supplier has like a set way of doing stuff. And this is how they measure success. So one of the great things from the past is actually like a sofa called Moment, which was done by Nils Gammelgård in the 80s or something. They started out going out to a factory for shopping trolleys. And by that, just going to a completely different way of making sofas, they cut the price by half. And it was like, you know, as good or better than a normal sofa. So that kind of thinking, we love that in IKEA. So I think that's where you come in.
How has the Atelier 100 process changed your career?
I mean, I'm speaking here. That's a big change. I think it was really their approach to kind of bring people together that wouldn't have these kinds of opportunities but had something interesting to explore, I think is amazing. I can't.
And is there anything you think they can do differently this year?
I think for a designer, there's a lot of distance between thinking of making something and understanding how you'd make it inside the four walls of your workshop and stepping into a frame of reference when you're talking to hundreds or thousands of people. And I think producing at scale or producing in factories, I think there's a different way of problem solving. So I guess if there's a way of bringing that into the educational process, I think that's interesting.
So the creatives need a little help in getting their product to the market.
Yeah.
I think we actually had like what we saw, so speaking to you guys from the very beginning, is a lot of the things or the skills needed is not just being taught as a designer or as a creative. I would say that all of the applicants were really good at that. It was more about everything else around being a designer, and especially being an independent. How do you sort out your economics? How do you do all of the boring things which are not taught at all in school, at least not in creative schools, which makes you a good entrepreneur. And that's also something that we added to this. Some bookkeeping.
Yeah.
To keep you alive.
One of the elements of it has been this focus on being hyper-local. Can you talk a little bit more about that, also in the context of how design companies and the industry is doing toward making the processes more sustainable?
Of course, it's super interesting with being local. That's one, it could be one of the ways of being more sustainable for the future, I must say. It's not necessarily so. It depends on how you do it and what you do. But for us, it was also like a challenge, I could speak for IKEA at least, that to do the very opposite of what we do normally. which is going in really large volumes and going maybe far away and produce like new things in big factories. This idea was to challenge ourselves also to see, could we find new ways for the future? So we said that we will do everything, so source the creatives within 100 kilometers, and also actually sell the things that we were doing within 100 kilometers, and produce them, which was the hardest part, within 100 kilometers of, Trafalgar Square, I think, at the end of the day. So that was like super big learnings for us, and I think things that we didn't talk about the program, but we did a thorough survey of all of the London area, what's possible to produce, what are the materialities that we could use at all here. And what you find there, which I think is interesting for a company like us for the future, is that maybe for the future, if you want to go for fully circular, one of the greatest sources for raw material for the future will be our biggest cities around the world, because they sit on the biggest city dumps of material. So how could we see that as a place for sourcing? And that completely tilts the way that you could do design for the future.
So sourcing from dumpsters.
Yeah, and from people. I mean, there's a lot of us who sits on a lot of stuff that we don't need, really. How could we turn that into better use for the future instead of throwing it away?
And Andrew, that's something you are very focused on, locally sourcing and a sustainable way of design. How has that process been for you in London? Is it easy to do that?
I'm kind of interested in the industry that is around me. And actually, a lot of the industry has left London. So a lot of the things I'm looking at are quite small scale, things that are consumer facing. So necessities that people need to live in London, and how that translates into like capacity to produce objects.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've made it through 45 minutes without bringing up Brexit, but I think now is the time. I mean, how does the UK more broadly fare when it comes to encouraging the creative industry? And has Brexit changed anything on the ground?
I think London specifically has this amazing thing where it has a really interesting, vibrant subculture, and it produces lots of culture, but it also has a really active market. So if you do something in London and it's successful, you have a way to speak to people about it, to sell it to people, for it to grow. And there aren't many cities in the world that have both of those things working really well. And I guess there's a chance that Brexit could affect both of those things. So it's yet to see how it will play out. But
Marcus, from a company perspective, what's your view on that?
I mean, we choose London for a reason, and if you look upon it historically, first of all, it's one of the most diverse cities in the world, and it's also has been pretty resilient from the past. But when you see, when the economy has gone down in the UK in the past, creativity has gone up. There's something about limitation of resources that make people more creative. And that's also how we actually work with it, how we make people creative within our company too. So we saw it as an opportunity. We think that something might happen here that could be good in the creative part.
Do we have a poll question that we can get up on the screen? Yes, when choosing a product I look at, is that the polling answers? Okay. So design seems to be a clear winner there. Oh no, maybe not. Let's go to the designer first and ask which one you would put on top.
I guess I have to say design, really, don't I? It's what I...
Yeah? Marcus, how would you rate that graph?
I think it depends on, we who sit here are pretty well off, I guess. So if you ask the same question in Croydon, I think the answer would be different. So for me, most of all, I would say like environmental footprint, because that's the only way that we could keep on designing for the future. Otherwise, we will be out of jobs. So I would say that's the most important part.
I guess my view is that the most sustainable design is the design we sustain, we keep. So it being something that has a personal connection or means something to you, or something that's well made and well designed, I think is a big part of it. But also, I think design is an opportunity to express your personality. So this design being this thing that you buy in a kind of specific design shop, I think it's kind of like more personal and more, you can seek it out in places that you wouldn't normally see it.
And that point that you made about design being very personal is a really interesting one because, and just coming back to the architectural panel, for instance, I was in India last week, and you're just going about the streets and you have all of this fantastic Mughal architecture, which is very unique to India in the sense that, you might see it in Istanbul as well, but it stands out. And I'm curious when you go inside people's homes, within cultures, do you see them preferring certain designs depending on the markets they're in?
Of course, there's a big difference on how people, if you just look upon how you use IKEA furniture, it's very different from market to market. And the styles as such, but our way of looking upon it is more like trying to adapt, first of all, like sizing that needs to be adapted for different markets. Things are smaller in Japan for obvious reasons and bigger in US because they have like bigger spaces and so forth. But from a style perspective, we try to actually to get as close as possible to show what's possible to do with the IKEA range. It's the same range all over the world, but the way that we put it together is different from country to country. And I find this fascinating. It's not like trying to dictate some kind of Scandinavian design world that it needs to be everywhere. It's actually, rather going for the dreams of the people in the different countries.
And so you'll work with local designers in all the markets?
No, we don't. I wish we would, to be honest, but we're pretty diverse. I mean, the people who's working with product development, I think it's actually in the middle of nowhere in Småland in Sweden. It's like this tiny place that has like the IKEA product development office. There's 56 nationalities working there. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a good start. What are the key trends you're seeing emerge in the design community around you right now, Andu? And do you have predictions for any big hits with consumers based on what you're seeing around you right now?
I think social media plays a big role in design from a designer's perspective, because suddenly you've got a mouthpiece where you can be your own kind of media person. But it also slightly changes the decisions you make and how the volumes you make in and what sorts of things you make. But kind of like stepping back from the designer, I think the same social media has changed who has a voice. It's kind of like, it's made conversations more diverse. So you have to kind of take into account more points of view and more people when you're thinking of ideas.
So would you say that design has become more democratic by it?
It depends where you're talking. I think design education maybe hasn't become more democratic, but the opportunities to be a creator and to kind of sell your creations and build a career from that, I think is a lot more democratic.
And what is for both of you, what is the one design idea that you were presented, or that, Marcus, we discussed this before, that you went to designers with and were told this is completely outrageous, and it actually came to fruition, with the exception of the chair?
I mean, this chair was impossible until this project allowed it to be made at a scale where one of them could be affordable. I think to make one is different to make, 20 or 30. So.
Or 20,000 or 200,000. I think I've kind of a fun story there, if you bear with me. So I was thinking about it since you asked before also. We got like the challenge. Sometimes we have those challenges. The hardest things to design at IKEA is the the things that has the lowest prices. That's super hard because they're already low, and then you compete with something that is low. We got a challenge like 10 years ago or something from the founder actually at the time. He saw the LED bulbs, the LED technology. That's like super interesting technology. It's really good, you know, it's lowering the energy, the energy efficiency is better, and it's also like good light source. But it cost at the time like 30 euro. And then he came to us in product development and said, and to the design department, I want to do one of these for €1 out.
Wow.
That was a big challenge.
How long did that take?
And we started to you know, iterate on it, to your point from here before, to find like new ways. And we ended up with like a completely new typology of light source. We thought that we were really smart in the design department. So we did like a small puck instead of having a light bulb. And we achieved that small LED puck to be for €3, I think, at the time. And then we were so happy about this. We really, yeah, he's going to be super happy when we show this, you know, achieved something. And then we showed it and said, like, you know, first of all, it's not €1. No, it's not. It's 3. Secondly, if this puck will work, you need to make people buy completely new lamps to be able to buy that puck. That's like not a good idea at all, because there's not so many people that needs a lamp that actually needs a bulb. So why did you do it like that? And then we had to start off from the very beginning and go into retrofitting, which I think is also something very sweet and very where we are right now. Like the science which is about retrofitting, using something that is already there, but make retrofits make it better. So then we did a bulb. After like 3 years, we achieved this in a very non-typical IKEA solutions, because it was not about negotiating or getting the things like at a lower price. It was actually choosing fewer components, but better, made it to the price point that we could actually sell it for €1. And that changed the whole business of LED at the time. So IKEA went out, taking out all of the other typologies of light sources, only selling LED, far before legislation happened. So that was good. Good for environment too, those changes.
And so it can happen.
It can happen, but it's hard, and you have to be persistent.
Now, Andrew, you know, every homeowner or office owner's design dream is to have a designer come and tell them what looks good and how to get this done, right? Now, since we all can't afford to do that, do you have any practical tips for consumers when looking for the best design products for their home spaces or office spaces?
I think...
So can we look at things from your eyes?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is not listen to tastemakers and people that tell
or
you...
trendsetters.
Trendsetters, because it is about your life. It's about your space and how you live in it. And you should sort of look inwards and ask yourself what you want from the space and how you want it to feel and look. And who, you know, a design is a representation in some ways of the designer that made it. Who do you want to populate your life, and what do you want the things you live with to mean? That would be my...
And Marcus, from a sustainability perspective, do you have any tips for consumers to keep in mind when they're looking at?
No, I think it's actually choose things that are long-lasting. That's like Anders said before. That's really good, but not just long-lasting, maybe from out of materialities, but also for your eyes. Something that you could, you know, live with for a long time. This is something you learn when you work like boring people like me that's worked in the same trade for so long. You get like your eyes get worn out more or less from out of looking at design. So you want something which is like non-design at all. Like, make the most boring home ever. Then I could live in it.
And finally, you know, from both of you, where are the exciting new trends in design emerging? And, you know, that's whether from a particular geography perspective or a particular product perspective. What should we be on the lookout for?
I think the major trends has always been it's so connected to new production technologies or new software technologies that could make things happen that was not possible before. And I think that there's still a lot to do with like generative design, using tools like AutoCAD and so on to actually find completely new solutions for how to make things work that you haven't seen before. And this I think is still uncharted territory, at least in interior design. I mean, interior design is so slow. It's compared to a lot of other typologies. There's not very much happening, so it's easy to surprise people.
I think the technology has advanced so much that it's almost, it becomes easier to make a technically impressive object. But it's what do these things mean? So it's how do we bring stories into design, and how do we make them mean something that we want to keep around for a longer period of time?
So there is no counter to IKEA just yet.
There's no?
There's no counter to IKEA.
Yeah, I guess there is a lot of them, so we love competition. I would like to see more.
But no one with that kind of reach and that kind of global heft.
I mean, we're on a global scale quite big, but in a lot of countries we're super small. I mean, what do we have in the US? 1.5% of the market share. There's a lot of job to do there, and I think that we're not like looking upon us as a company. We are trying to, fulfill our vision instead, and making it possible for people to live a better life. So through the things that we sell. So that's a never-ending story, I must say.
Lastly, just to confirm, so this is not assembled at home, or is it? Okay. For those who are looking at audio.
And also one of the things, the criticism to Andrew also is not at all flat packable. But he will learn.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please welcome Andrew Anagnost, President and CEO Autodesk, and Bloomberg's Elena Wheel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Wheel. I'm Design Manager for Bloomberg and Workplace Strategy Lead, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Andrew Anagnost, President and CEO of Autodesk, for his sponsor spotlight, The Future of Design+Make. Hi, Andrew.
Hello,
and welcome.
nice to meet you.
Could you please tell us all a bit about what Autodesk does?
Well, Autodesk, coincidentally, we make software for people that make things. Historically, people know us for AutoCAD. However, the company is really defined by being a 3D modeling company today. So the products that define the company are Revit, Fusion, Maya. These are where the majority of the innovation and actually usage is going on in our space. But we're actually moving beyond that into connecting the design and make processes in the cloud on platforms that support various industries. So we started off as a mechanical drafting and architectural drafting tool. Now we're moving into a world where we're connecting design and make processes in the cloud.
We have leaders here with us today who design and make the world around us. What do you see as the challenges that their companies and the industries that Autodesk supports are facing both now and into the future?
We have a kind of a unique view on this because we're up above what people are doing, so we see the whole ecosystem. I think I'd like to go back in the Wayback Machine for a minute to talk about this. Go way back to the calm, easygoing days, the halcyon days, so to speak, 2019. And back then when I talked to customers, the conversations were about talent, and hiring and recruiting talent. It was a lot about connecting data between various files. People always talk about cost management. And the conversation about bringing new processes to the cloud, connecting people differently. It was kind of a push from the software side. And then all of a sudden, the world shut down. And for all of us, frankly, Autodesk included, things that seemed distant suddenly became very imminent. And the things that changed primarily for our customers and for all of us is the war for talent changed dramatically. Everybody saw a shortage and a constraint of talent coming down the pipeline. But now, people have exited the workforce. The level of technical acumen required in almost all the disciplines that our customers work in, construction, architecture, mechanical design, manufacturing, it's gone up. So people are struggling to find the right people for the right job and also trying to work with them in highly distributed environments. So that's like front and center for a lot of people. People still talk about cost right now today. So if you look at the report that was recently published, people talk about cost. However, I think that's kind of in the moment, right? Because people are feeling these inflationary pressures right now. I think people need to be talking more about connectivity and throughput and capacity in the future. Because I think all of you know, this industry of designing and making things has a massive capacity problem. There are more things that need to be made, there are more things that need to be created than there are people, money, or material to do. We really have a capacity problem, and it's a highly disconnected ecosystem. And the other thing is that comes front and center to people now is resiliency, being able to respond. I'll tell you, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if I sat with a manufacturing customer, I had no conversation about supply chain diversity or kind of creating different pipes in different ways. It was all about just-in-time manufacturing with a small set of cheapest possible supply chain partners. Now everybody's talking about, I need to have a resilient supply chain management, everybody, construction industry, it doesn't matter, and I need to have it multipolar, coming from multiple sources so that if one fails, I can pick up in a different direction. These conversations have changed, and also, instead of a push on the cloud and technologies, now it's like, hey, Autodesk, what are you doing? You know, where's this? Where's that? It's a total flip. It's a pull. So I think people are going to see these challenges around people, technology, and processes moving forward accelerating. More and more, these processes have to get connected. They have to get tightly integrated because the pressures on all of you from your customers are just going to continue to increase.
I've heard you talk a lot about the importance of connecting exactly the digital and physical processes. Why is that important, and how is technology from companies like Autodesk making that happen?
Yeah, so first off, the biggest loss in all of your processes, and you can all tell me later if you don't agree with me, though I've been around a long time and I think I see a lot of these things, is just the handoff between the various stages of the process, the reinterpretation, the redo. Just look at the AEC ecosystem. Nobody wants to touch the other person's model. So what happens? What happens as a result? People create 3, 4 different models for the same project, and the models don't talk to each other, they don't collaborate well. The owner, the person who actually is paying the money, has no single, all due respect to the Foster's speaker earlier, and where is he? Is he still here?
Michael.
Oh yeah, okay. Handing that digital twin to the customer right now is kind of a fiction with regards to the as-built, unless you are in absolute, utter, total control of the entire process. All right, and I don't think all of you appreciate how much, maybe you do, how much time and energy is wasted on the fact that you are not all working on one thing. So connecting these processes means that you're all engaged in one thing all the time, and you know who's doing what at every step in the process, who's responsible for what, who's adding, who's taking away. You can have your own sandboxes, but they all have to merge together dynamically, because right now, a lot of mistakes, a lot of waste, and a lot of redo goes on in the processes. And all the beautiful work that an architect or an engineer might do to create a more sustainable project gets thrown away in the construction execution with substitutions. It gets thrown away in the manufacturing with different processes. These things have to get connected in the future if we're going to realize the kind of hyper throughput ecosystem that we want.
What about artificial intelligence? Seems to be advancing with increasing speed. We're hearing about new applications of AI coming up all the time. What impact will AI have on industry professionals?
It's going to put everybody out of work. Everybody. There won't be any jobs for anybody. Look, so one of the things I really love about ChatGPT is it allows us to have a nuanced discussion, because for a long time we've been talking about AI at Autodesk. We do little AI and big AI inside of Autodesk. And we've been telling people about this notion of, no, you're going to collaborate with the system to get your problems done. The system will be just another collaborator on the team. And if there's something you can see about ChatGPT, the way it's being used by people, it's being used for first drafts to cheat on homework, okay? But it's being used to prompt or stimulate or create initial ideas. It's not omnipotent. It makes lots of mistakes. It's only as good as the data that has been put into it and how that data has been encoded, by the way. Has everybody heard of this concept of hallucinations, machine hallucinations? This is a very real concept, because all of you are all capable of daily hallucinations. Have you ever looked at all those things about tricking your eyes? You know, like Twitter, they're always getting a picture about how it tricks your eyes. Do you see this? Do you not see that? That's because your brain encodes information for your eyes in the most simple way so that you can make quick, probabilistic approximations. That's how AI works. You encode the data wrong, it hallucinates and gives you odd answers or doesn't see things. It's going to be a while before the technology is so smart and so capable that it starts to become some kind of existential threat to everything. And in our space, the world of designing and making things, it's going to be even longer. So here's what's really going to happen with AI. And here's what we're working on and the kind of things we're doing. AI is going to be a collaborative tool. It is going to remove a lot of, I would say, non-value added work. You want a 3D model so that you can test the idea, build it before it's built, manufacture it, and play with it before you use it. But you really don't want to make it. That is not a value-added process to your creative process. If the machine, on a prompt, creates an initial 3D model for you and continues to refine the 3D model over time, that leaves you more time to problem solve, to collaborate, to iterate. And that is more likely the future. Now, does that mean there are going to be fewer people per project? It absolutely means that, okay? There will be fewer people required to execute a project. However, we are living in a world right now where we cannot execute enough projects. So if we can drive down the cost of an individual project, drive the number of people down per project, what happens? More projects get through the pipe. And that's really the more realistic world we're heading to. More projects through a pipe that has a lot more productivity associated with it, because a lot of the intensive labor that goes into making something buildable, manufacturable, is actually taken over by the collaborative assistant that becomes the computer. That is the more likely world we're heading to. Fewer jobs per project, but more projects, and likely more people employed in the ecosystem because there's more throughput. And I am an optimistic about this whole in there. I know there is such a thing as bad AI. There are going to be professions that are completely wiped out by AI. There's no doubt about it. It's not going to be the act of designing and making things, though.
All of this digital transformation and its acceleration, there's no doubt it's impacting the workforce. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for leaders to attract, train, and retain talent?
So if you're in school today, what are you hearing? You know, you're studying architecture, you're studying engineering, you're studying construction management, you're studying civil engineering. What are you hearing today? You're hearing technology's changing everything. You're hearing that AI is going to change the way processes work. You're hearing that you're going to have to be more adaptive in your career, that things are going to be more multidisciplinary. These things are being fed into the educational system, even at the tippy top of the educational system and even in the middle of the educational system. So what do you want as you head out into the workforce? You want to see a company that is ahead on the technology curve, that embraces multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary work, that has a path that allows you to kind of experience different things so that you can work with these new technologies to achieve things, you're not going to want to work for the company that's stuck in the past. So the companies that are further along in the digital maturity curve, by the way, we see this in software as well, right? The software world's changing. Do you think AI isn't going to reduce the number of programmers per Scrum team? It's absolutely going to reduce the number of programmers per Scrum team. And who do the software developers want to work for? They want to work for the most advanced companies that are looking at these technologies. So you have to start thinking about your digital infrastructure in new and different ways, because they're also going to be a recruitment tool. It's not just going to be how you get things done. It's going to be how people address or grade you in terms of some place they want to work.
Amazing. I mean, thank you, Andrew, so much. That was a great conversation. Thank you for joining me. As an architect, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you tonight. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bensound.com.
Please welcome Mike McGee, Chief Creative Officer, Framestore, Jed Simmons, Managing Director, Offices, Mace, Miranda McLaren, Director, Morris & Company, and Bloomberg City Labs, Fergus O'Sullivan.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to my final time moderating before I'm replaced by AI. Next time, instead of me, there's going to be a really, really cool children's toy in this chair. So look forward to that. This is our final session of the evening, so let's make it interactive. We've got this amazing system that you can seamlessly submit your questions, so please do that throughout the session. What I think is really interesting about this session is that we have a group of 3 people who 20 years ago would not be in the same building, let alone the same room. Very different audiovisual industries, construction, architecture. Okay, you two maybe, but but now these industries are all using overlapping tools and overlapping with each other in kind of some interesting ways. Now, I want to drill into that a little bit as we move on, but I think first, just to get it as concrete as possible, because we're talking about, you know, all these different new technologies. So I'd like to start with you, Jed, the chief. Sorry, what's your? If you can remind me of your job title.
Managing
It's
Director.
behind me, Chief. Excuse me. Now, you've been talking to me in the green room about the way that your industry is being completely revolutionized by all sorts of new types of new technology. In terms of your sort of daily bread and butter, what are the actual tools we're talking about that have been most transformative, and how are they being employed?
So it was touched on by some of the earlier speakers. I think probably the biggest change for us is the way we operate, particularly in the world of design, and increasingly that now moves forward into the world of manufacture. So I suppose we go back historically, the way the industry used to be, going back way back when, architects would design a building with their design colleagues. That information would be passed across as the builder, then we'd go out there and build that building. That's now changed, and what we're finding now is those boundaries are no longer there as boundaries. There's very much an overlap with the architects, where we're able to bring our expertise through the supply chain and the specialists who are now quite skilled within the elements of design, and whilst protecting the architectural intent, are able to work with the architects to help take that design forward. So we're now moved a long way now into that design sphere where perhaps historically we didn't used to be.
So it's more integrated. Well, I think there is an interesting parallel with your work there, Mike, because of course Framestore, when you started, I mean, back in the 80s, it was more of a post-production house. So it's about, you know, taking images and doing something with them afterwards. Whereas now it's not just the tools you use to create audiovisual imagery. It's also the entire process is being completely upended in terms of when you get involved, if I'm right in assuming that.
Yes, so I suppose when we started the business 37 years ago now, it was very much
somebody would shoot something, they'd give us the film material, and then we would enhance it with computer graphics or with graphic layers. Today, the technology now allows us to go way beyond that, to actually conceive the ideas, to imagine them, to build worlds and environments that you can stand within, to use technology like VR and AR to put yourselves inside sets before they're built, to then design from the inside out, and then to make creatures and environments that can look seamlessly real, but using computer technology. So our job or our interaction in the creative process goes from the very earliest stage of concept. In fact, studios will quite often come to us with scripts before they're even greenlit internally, and ask us to show them what they will look like, to imagine the colors, the ambiance, the action that might be within a sequence, so that they can then compete within the studio for which film gets greenlit. So being involved in every stage of the creative process makes our world a much more creatively satisfying place to be, but also means that we have to have also a huge range of skills. So we have physicians, mathematicians, computer scientists and engineers teamed up with people like myself, who's a graphic designer. We have photographers, directors and writers, and it's that combination of science and art that make us able to do what we do.
Well, we actually already have a question that touches on that sheer variety of skills, but I think I'd like to bring Miranda in first. Now, we were talking earlier, and I understand actually you have some anxieties, reservations about the extreme rapidity and acceleration of tech tools within architecture. And what's the area which, within your own practice at Morris & Company, you've seen most transformed in recent years?
I think what's been really, really useful, is probably talking Autodesk CEO, is the kind of understanding what our current design processes are and how we can use that time more valuably. And I think that what we've managed to do is also, what I think we're sort of touching on, is sort of stages of design. So previously, kind of go through various stages, there might be quite a bit of waste, you then review that, you then assess it, you get another discipline in, they'd say redo it, you've done it wrong, go back. I think now we're realizing that through sort of digital processes, we're able to front end a lot of that, and that is very much about creating scripts that you can overlay, or very fancy Excel spreadsheet, or plugins that we're adding into Revit that are actually designed for the way that we want to be designing what we want to be doing. So, for example, we can take a site now, and this is all relatively new for us in the sense of myself, someone that's not so technically savvy, can though very quickly sort of do a quick SketchUp model, have a plug-in, review the embodied carbon and operational carbon at a high level about how the orientation, form factor, etc. is affecting that design. So that's already just meaning that we're making more sensible, meaningful decisions of the kind of quality of the kind of questions we want to ask ourselves as designers. So I guess where I see the huge value is when it's really about really a helpful tool that we want to have already, and it's just being a bit more efficient and more front end with it. But the most important question always is just like, why? Why are we using that? Why do we have that data? And I guess that's where hopefully the designers are still very critical to that.
And just to pick up on Jed's point, are you finding a greater interaction with the developers and construction companies throughout the process?
I think we're starting to, aren't we? Because I think back. I'm just echoing what I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. The big man, the CEO, is that Andrew. Thank you. Is at the moment, I'd say there's sort of the legal issues, the PI issues. I think that we have the ability, don't we? Sort of the Revit model is very quite intelligent. There is means in which you can share that. But at the moment, I don't think there is actually the kind of, I think we're all still in the test bedding era, and I think once the lawyers get in the PI insurance and we start seeing case studies about this, but the abilities are there, and we can see it much better when, for example, we're novated to a contractor, when we're working with a contractor later, where we really are sharing that because they become our client. So we then work in a much more sort of dynamic way, and then you can really see that benefits. I think there is these kind of stages and legal implications that need to be tested out to really get that proper collaboration that we all probably desperately need.
Well, you did kind of touch on the big question there, which is why, which is something I hope we're going to have a chance to look through. Mike, one of the things I think is interesting about the audiovisual industry is it's really not the most obvious thing that springs to mind when people worry about concerns with sustainability. You see people laying a wall of, well, no, they don't lay walls of bricks anymore, seeing people pouring concrete. You think, what's the footprint of that? But of course, we all companies need to work with that. Has, aside from allowing you a more sophisticated product, have your recent changes in working practices enabled that in any way?
Yes, during the pandemic, it's a very relevant case in point, is that we weren't able to travel, so we weren't able to go on location and film. Literally, all production pretty much stopped during pandemic. So a lot of our clients were then turning to us as a trusted partner and saying, how can we continue to make content when we can't go anywhere? And so one of the solutions for that was to use LED screens like we have behind us here. And instead of using a blue screen, we would generate content in the computer that could then be placed on the screen. And then we could transport people literally to other worlds or other parts of the world through computer-generated imagery on a screen and make much more sustainable content and lowering the carbon footprint by doing it all in one place. And we actually shot a whole 8-part Netflix series in that way called 1899. And it was all filmed in a big volume studio with 260-degree panoramic screen and a giant turntable that could hold 52 tons in weight so that we could rotate the sets and leave the cameras in one position. So a huge amount of innovation went into work out how to continue working, but has also produced a very sustainable new process.
Now, staying on the issue of sustainability, because of course the kind of sustainability you're talking about is completely vital. Everyone needs to reduce their carbon footprint. At the same time, there are broader interpretations of what sustainability might be. Socially sustainable construction and development needs to be socially sustainable if it's not going to, exacerbate unaffordability, for example. That could cause all sorts of problems down the line, which means that practices have to change. Do you think, either of you, do you think that they're useful tools for creating a more socially sustainable production, a more socially sustainable form of design, or do you think that they sort of pose potential obstacles or fail to really address that? I suppose I'll start with Jed, just because we haven't heard from you for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I can just answer that slightly differently. I think probably the more pressing issue for us is the right here, right now. So I think, you may have to talk a bit more about the social impact, but I think, the construction industry and the built environment produces 40% of global emissions. So we have a responsibility to try and address that. And some very obvious things are, over 50% of all the waste produced in the UK by weight comes from the construction industry. So we are very, very wasteful in terms of the way we currently build. And that's because a lot of what we do, the way designs evolve and the way we actually assemble them is very traditional. So packets of plasterboard are delivered to site, lengths of pipework are sort of delivered to site, and things are then cut and adapted on site, and the waste then goes in the skip and disappears from the site. So what we need to do with the use of technology is we need to standardize things more and make sure they are repeatable. So we can move much more to that manufacturing type model. Now that means working with the designers, because it's quite important that we do produce these fantastic buildings, but the bits that sit behind it can be repeatable. And it does require that manufacturing-based approach, because we're a very inefficient industry still. I mean, the manufacturing industry had a 6.5-fold increase in productivity compared to the construction industry over the last 10 years. So it shows there's huge opportunity for us. And I think working with skilled designers and informed clients, if we can get that repetition of standardization using a kit of parts, then we can revolutionize the industry, and certainly then in terms of carbon, we can vastly reduce it. And I think adding to that, what we also have responsibility is to look at the assets that already exist, and this is happening. We have to stop talking about demolition contractors and talk about reclamation contractors, salvaging the items from the building, how they can be reused and repurposed, how you can keep the assets that actually exist, and the industry start to make sort of great strides into that space.
Very true. Amanda?
Yeah, very good. I think it's this balance of both, isn't it, in terms of the environmental or operational and embodied carbon. So just to reiterate that we're doing similar things. We're plugging into Revit to get materials within our 3D model, and we can look at the embodied content of that, and we make decisions based on sort of, again, it's sort of data informing and helping us with our design. Obviously, social sustainability critical, because what's the point in building anything then if it's not going to be socially sustainable? And I think the best thing that probably all architects and builders could do would do nothing, I suppose. That's one thing as well. There's an element of like, we've got enough existing buildings, we've got enough things, we've got a hell of a lot of waste, how can we reuse, what can we do? But actually the social sustainability is where there's a huge question mark. So for example, we're in a massive housing crisis, doing nothing doesn't seem like a very good response on that end. So it's this balance always of trying to work out how you can do something as environmentally friendly as possible, but as resilient and long-term, and be really sort of helping people at the moment. We've got a terrible homelessness crisis, for example. We need to act now, so we need to get homes built.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're talking about, in many ways, that there is some sort of positive potential there. To come back to this question we've got from the audience, actually for you, Mike, in terms of the potential positive input, will AI solve some of the skill shortage issues that the BFX and post-production industry has?
Absolutely. I think the concept of smaller teams and having some of the craft work that we at the moment put a lot of people onto, things like cutting or rotoscoping, drawing around something to cut it off a background to put it onto another. Some of these processes can be automated. Finding ways to speed up rendering times and to be able to iterate quicker and to be more efficient then in the way that we process our images, all make for us to be, to be more productive and to do it at a cheaper cost level. We were talking about the demand for more content. I think during a time of recession, there's always a greater demand on us to produce more content. During the pandemic, we saw streaming services go through the ceiling, and every maker of content or IP owner wanted to make something. And there just wasn't enough capacity. So for us, AI is going to assist. It will inspire, as was mentioned earlier, but it will be a great tool for allowing the creative people to concentrate more on the creative process and free up people from doing some of the heavy lifting, the grunt work.
Okay. To go back into that, I'd be interested to just pick up on something Andrew said, that said that designers are not going to be losing their jobs. Of course, one door closes, another one opens. We know that these processes are dynamic. Do you share that optimism?
I think to a degree, in the sense that, as hopefully for the reasons that I've said, I think the kind of what are we doing it for? In the end, we're still designing for humans and the planet that require humans to make those decisions. But I am a little bit nervous, because I think that a lot of the idea, I think that Andrew was saying about how the process of drawing isn't necessarily something, it's the expression of, sort of grunt work, or it's not necessary. I find that complicated, because I completely understand kind of repetitive simple behavior, but actually the sort of the art sometimes of the making of the process can also inform how then you're designing and how you're understanding that object, or how those kit of parts come together, or so I think the process of making and designing informs really good quality design. So I think there's some balance there that needs to be found. And I'm a little bit concerned that it could be that it's all kind of, well, we don't need to do that. We can step back and all become sort of critiques, design critiques, but rather than necessarily getting into. So I have a slight concern that less isn't always more, but perhaps that's just my feeling. I don't know. I'm sure you're going to completely disagree with me, aren't you?
I mean, I'm interested to hear what your take on that is. I mean, you're not specifically, you're more in the delivery, though that's, of course, enormously complex, and as you pointed out, you're integrated into the design process. But in your section of the process, what are the roles that you see expanding, and what are the roles you see contracting? Or is there some obstacle towards that process that still needs to remove before we get to the future?
I mean, if we're talking about general skills, I think we're going to be looking more for multi-skilled individuals as opposed to specialists. And this whole concept I just talked about, if we can get the kit of parts right, then we're going to be more about assembling things on site rather than having to use highly skilled, very well-paid craftsmen to actually create things on site. If we get this right, what it means is we can then use semi-skilled labour in a manufacturing environment rather than highly skilled labour on site. And of course, with the advent of technology, everyone has to increasingly upskill themselves. So those who can't move with the times are going to find themselves in a situation where they're not with the rest of the industry. That potentially vulnerable situation. But as an industry, we are sort of got an aging demographic anyway. So I think we're going to see a lot of new people coming into the industry over the next few years anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Almost finished already. That was quick. I suppose maybe just a last question then is that if you've had to or rejoiced in adapting to all these different new tools, what is the one thing that you yearn for that is still lacking? If I just had that, and it's something, I mean, what would it be? You can say nothing if it's nothing. Don't worry.
I actually think we'll probably I probably need to talk to Andrew about it, don't I? Because I think that if, for example, Revit, we're spending a lot of our energy creating. I think he was saying that there's a pull now, because now we're realising what the abilities of that is, and I think we just need it to have sort of more ability to have these sort of data within it already. So, for example, we're putting in a hell of a lot of time and sort of plugins and things to try and get it, and we're investing in this research ourselves. Then we're sharing it with all of our consultants and members. So that's happening a lot, which is fantastic. But I think maybe that could be done already. So that would be very useful. So I'll talk to him later.
Okay.
I suppose my desire is really we want to be able to do things quicker and more efficiently. And that involves taking out lots of things, I think, removing process that isn't necessary, that whole sort of way we look at the building environment and that more collaborative approach that we are seeing, but I think there's more that can be done in that space.
For me, I suppose it's, yes, we want to do things quicker, we want to be more productive, we want to be more creative, but I've noticed over the past few years how a collective team of creative people has suddenly all been sent home. Everybody is now back in their bedrooms. And how do we bring those creative teams back together again in a way that is as engaging and rewarding and educational as it used to be? There was a process for climbing the ladder and learning from your peers, and there's something in a shared community being creative together that I struggle with sometimes when everybody is on flat screens a long way away from each other. So it's looking for that way to bring back that culture of caring and embracing the fun of what we do, and also doing everything else we've just mentioned.
Yes, I think a lot of us feel that way, that there's something, that there's some sort of link in the chain that hasn't been broken. It's all a little thin, and we'd like to sort of reconnect that a little bit more strongly. I'm afraid that's actually all we've got time for. Very interesting just to hear all your different viewpoints. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed the evening sessions as much as I did. I just want to say a couple of thank yous, and then I want to invite you all to come outside to network, but also more importantly, we have 2 building tours. So please join us on tours of the building and also of the Mithraeum downstairs. But I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Autodesk, for making this evening possible, to our incredible lineup of speakers and moderators, but most of all to all of you for being such an engaged audience. We did get more questions than we normally get, so again, a big thank you, and join us outside. We'll see you there.